You stand on a low rise at the edge of the grazing ground, watching the horses spread out across the winter-brown grass. The afternoon light is thin and pale, the kind of light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, filtered through a high layer of cloud that has been sitting over the steppe for days. The air carries the dry scent of cold earth and old grass, and beneath that, the faint metallic smell of coming snow. You have known this smell since you were a child, standing beside your grandmother at the tent door, her hand resting on your shoulder, her quiet voice naming the signs of weather. Now you read the signs yourself, without thinking, the way you read the shape of a horse's ear or the tension in a leather tie. A small change begins far to the north, where the sky pales from grey to a milky white, a soft erasure of the low hills that mark the horizon. You watch it happen without moving, your hands tucked into the sleeves of your coat, your weight settled evenly on both feet. The wind that has been steady from the west all morning now shifts, turning its face to the northeast, and you feel the first real bite of winter on your cheeks, a sharpness that makes the skin tighten and the eyes water just slightly at the corners. You pull the collar of your sheepskin coat higher, feeling the wool lining press against your chin and the sides of your neck, a familiar comfort that you have worn into shape over many seasons. The horses notice the change at the same moment you do, perhaps a heartbeat before. The lead mare, a heavy-boned grey with a scar on her left shoulder from an old wolf encounter, lifts her head from the grass and points her ears northward, her nostrils testing the air with small fluttering movements. She does not call out or stamp her foot. There is no alarm in her posture, only a quiet reassessment of the afternoon. You watch her and she watches the horizon, and between you passes an understanding that needs no words, the same understanding that has passed between herders and horses on this grass for more years than anyone can count. The herd begins to adjust itself, not with any haste, but with the slow, considered movements of animals who have done this before. The family bands draw closer together, the mares shifting their positions so that the foals are placed on the sheltered side, away from the new wind. The young stallion who keeps a small band on the eastern edge trots a half-circle around his mares, his neck arched but not tense, his tail held low against the gusts that have begun to push down from the north in uneven pulses. You count heads, a habit so old that your eyes do the work without your mind giving any instruction. 18 mares in the lead band, 5 foals, the lead mare herself, 12 in the second band with the bay stallion and his 2 yearlings, 7 in the small band of younger horses who have not yet found their permanent families. The numbers settle in your mind and rest there, a quiet satisfaction. You walk slowly along the edge of the herd, your boots making a soft crunching sound on the frozen grass stems. The ground here is not yet snow-covered, only stiff with cold, each blade of grass coated in a fine white rime that melts at your touch. Your boots are old and well mended, the leather uppers greased with mutton fat to keep the wet out, the soles made of several layers of felt and hide stitched together with sinew. They make a particular sound that you have come to associate with winter afternoons, a sound that tells you the temperature is low enough to freeze the moisture inside the grass stems, making them brittle underfoot. You pass close to a young foal, a colt of the spring with a dark coat that will grey out as he matures, and you pause to look at him. He stands tucked against his mother's flank, his head low and his eyes half closed, saving warmth. His coat is thick and fluffy, the guard hairs standing out from a dense underlayer of fine wool, and a small patch of frost has formed on the tip of each ear. You do not touch him, knowing that he is comfortable and that your hand would only disturb the layer of warm air trapped against his skin. His mother turns her head to look at you, her dark eye calm, and you meet her gaze for a moment before moving on. The wind continues to strengthen, not in gusts but in a steady increase of pressure, like a hand pressing more and more firmly against your back. You turn your face away from it, letting it slide past your left cheek, and you notice that the horses have all turned their backs to the north as well, presenting the thickest part of their bodies to the weather. Their tails are clamped down against the wind, their heads lowered, their ears flattened sideways. They have stopped grazing entirely now, and stand in a long loose line, a living fence against the cold. The sight of them arranged this way always reminds you of your uncle's words, spoken on the night much like this one long ago, that horses know how to endure what the sky sends, if only the herder will let them. You climb the low rise again, the same spot where you began, and look out over the land to the north. The milky whiteness has spread and deepened, and now you can see a faint curtain of grey falling from the base of the clouds, a distant veil that you know is snow already falling on the far grazing grounds. It will reach you soon, perhaps within the hour. There is no urgency in this knowledge, only the practical turning of your thoughts toward the tasks ahead, the tent to check, the hay to uncover and carry, the water to bring inside before it freezes solid. You stand for another long moment, letting the wind push against you, and you feel your own smallness in the great open space of the steppe, a smallness that is not frightening but somehow comforting, the same comfort a foal might feel pressed against his mother in the dark. The light begins to change as the afternoon wears on, the thin pale quality giving way to a deeper grey that erases shadows and flattens the contours of the land. You can no longer see the far hills, only the rolling slopes of the nearer ground and the dark shapes of the horses standing patient in the grass. The world feels smaller now, closed in, and the sound of the wind has risen to a steady low hum that fills your ears and seems to vibrate in your chest. You listen to it the way you might listen to a familiar song, noting the variations in pitch as it passes over different surfaces of the land, the low spots and the high ridges, the clumps of dry brush and the smooth stretches of short grass. You begin to walk back toward the winter camp, following a path that is not really a path but a slight depression in the ground, worn by your own feet over the past weeks. The grass here is flattened in a narrow ribbon that winds between low sagebrush and the occasional rock half buried in the soil. You know every turn of it, every place where a stone might catch your boot in the dark, every spot where the ground dips and collects water in the spring. You walk it now with the ease of long habit, your body finding its way while your eyes remain on the herd, watching for any sign that one of the horses might be restless or unwell. But the herd is calm, and you are calm, and the afternoon passes in the slow, measured way that winter afternoons always pass on the steppe. As you approach the camp, the shape of your felt tent comes into clearer view, a low, rounded form that sits in the lee of a long ridge running east to west. The ridge is not high, no more than twice the height of a man, but it is enough to break the full force of the north wind, deflecting it upward so that it passes over the tent rather than through it. Your grandfather chose this spot many winters ago, and his father before him, and the ground inside the tent hollow has been worn smooth by generations of feet and layered with old felts that have long since become part of the earth itself. The tent walls are a warm grey-brown, the colour of well-used wool, and the smoke hole at the top is capped with a piece of felt weighted down by a flat stone on a leather cord. A thin wisp of dung smoke leaks from the side of the cap, torn away immediately by the wind, a signal that the stove inside is still holding its warmth. You pause outside the tent and look back at the herd one more time before going in. They are still standing in their line, patient and unmoving, and the first few flakes of snow have begun to fall, small dry crystals that ride the wind sideways without touching the ground, swirling in the air like dust motes in a shaft of light. They are barely visible against the grey sky, but you see them, and you note their presence the way you note all the small changes of the day, adding them to the long tally of observations that make up the life of a herder. The snow will be heavier by nightfall, and you will need to be ready. You loosen the leather thongs that hold the tent door closed and push aside the felt flap, ducking through the low entrance and into the dim interior. The air inside is noticeably warmer, not hot, but a gentle warmth that settles around you like a blanket, smelling of wool and smoke and the faint sweetness of dried grass. The small iron stove sits in the center of the tent, its squat body radiating heat that you can feel on your face as you straighten up. A pot of water stands on its flat top, not boiling, but steaming lightly, the tiny bubbles forming on the bottom and rising to the surface with a soft hiss. You take off your outer coat and hang it on a wooden peg driven into the lattice wall, then sit down on the layered felt carpets beside the stove, crossing your legs and resting your hands on your knees. For a time you simply sit, listening to the wind press against the felt walls, which move slightly with each gust, breathing like a living thing. The sound is muffled inside the tent, softened by the thick layers of wool that surround you, and the stove makes its own small noises, the creak of the metal expanding, the whisper of the dung burning down to ash. You close your eyes and let the warmth seep into your cheeks and your hands, feeling the stiffness of the cold slowly release its grip on your muscles. You do not sleep, but you rest, the way a horse rests standing up, alert and yet at ease, present in the moment without strain. After a time you open your eyes and reach for the leather water bag that hangs from one of the tent poles. You drink a few swallows of water, cold and tasting faintly of the leather it has been stored in, and then you pour a little more into a small clay bowl and set it on the stove to warm. While the water heats, you take out a piece of dried curd from a pouch, hard and pale yellow, and hold it in your mouth to soften before chewing. The taste is mild and salty, a taste you have known all your life. The taste of summer milk preserved for winter days. You eat slowly, not from hunger, but from the knowledge that your body needs fuel to stay warm through the night ahead. The water in the bowl begins to steam, and you lift it carefully with a folded piece of felt, setting it on the carpet beside you to cool a little before drinking. The warmth of it passes down your throat and into your chest, spreading outward, and you feel your body settling even more deeply into the quiet rhythm of the tent, the rhythm of the stove, the rhythm of the wind outside that has become a steady pressure against the walls. You think of the horses standing out in the falling snow, their thick coats and their slow breathing, their patient acceptance of the weather, and you know that you will go out again soon to check on them. But for now, for this small space of time, you remain inside, listening to the hiss of the stove and the wind's low song, waiting for the snow to arrive in earnest. The first flakes arrive not as a storm, but as a slow scattering of small dry crystals that ride the slanting wind. They come one by one at first, a few pale specks drifting past your face as you step back out of the tent, and they touch the brown grass without melting, resting on the stiff blades like tiny seeds. The air feels different now, colder and sharper against your cheeks, and the light has shifted again into a deeper shade of grey that seems to press down on the land from all sides. You pull your coat tighter and look toward the herd, seeing the horses still standing in their line, their backs already beginning to collect a thin dusting of white. You walk out toward them with a quiet patience, your boots leaving dark prints in the frost that will soon be covered over. The snow is falling more steadily now, the flakes growing larger and softer as you move through them, and they make a faint sound against your coat, a tiny rustle almost too faint to hear unless you listen for it. You do listen, because listening is part of the work, part of the long attention that herding requires. The sound is like dry grass brushing together, or like the whisper of grain pouring into a leather sack, and it blends with the low hum of the wind to create a kind of silence rather than a noise, a blanket of small sounds that muffles everything else. The horses see you coming, and some of the older ones turn their heads slightly, acknowledging your presence without moving from their places. The lead mare stands at the center of her band, her grey coat already half white with snow, and she watches you approach with her calm, dark eye. You walk up to her and rest your hand on her shoulder, feeling the deep warmth that rises from her skin beneath the thick winter hair, a warmth that spreads into your cold fingers and reminds you of the stove inside the tent. Her shoulder is solid and still, and she leans just slightly into your touch, the smallest pressure, as if to say that she knows you are there, and that is enough. You speak low words to her, words that are more breath than voice, the same soft sounds you have used with horses since you were a child learning to walk among them. She does not respond in any visible way, but you can feel her attention resting on you, calm and steady. You move on from the lead mare and walk slowly through the herd, weaving between the dark shapes of the horses who stand with their heads lowered and their eyes half closed against the wind. The snow collects in the hollows of their backs, along the curve of their necks, on the tips of their ears, and they do not shake it off because shaking would cost warmth, and because the snow itself, once it settles, becomes a layer of insulation against the colder air. You have known this since you were old enough to understand the stories your elders told around the stove on winter nights. stories about how the snow is not an enemy but a blanket, how it keeps the earth warm for the grass roots and keeps the animals warm if they know how to stand still and let it cover them. You pause beside a young foal, a filly of the spring with a pale dun coat that makes her almost invisible against the snow. She's pressed tight against her mother's flank, her small head tucked under the mare's belly where the warmth is greatest, and her eyes are closed in that deep foal sleep that looks so fragile but is actually tough as old leather. You do not touch her, knowing that her mother would not mind but that the filly herself might startle and lose a little of her stored heat. Instead, you simply stand near them for a moment, blocking the wind with your body, and you watch the snowflakes land on the mare's back and melt there from the warmth rising through her coat. The melting makes a small dark spot on the snow that has already accumulated, and then a fresh flake covers the spot, and the process repeats. A tiny cycle of warmth and cold that you observe without thinking about it, the way you observe the breathing of the herd and the angle of the wind. The snow thickens gradually, the way fog thickens, or the way night comes on in winter, a slow accumulation that you notice only when you look up and realize that the far hills have disappeared. The landscape that was wide and open an hour ago has shrunk to a small circle around you, a circle of falling white that moves with you as you walk. You can no longer see the tent from where you stand among the horses, and you make a note of your position relative to the low ridge that rises to the north, keeping that awareness in the back of your mind the way you keep the count of the herd. The ridge is a constant, a fixed point in a world that has become soft and shifting, and you know that if the snow grows too thick, you need only walk southward to find the camp again. The herd has stopped grazing entirely now, their heads hanging low and their muzzles nearly touching the ground, though they are not eating. They stand in a long, loose line that curves slightly at the ends, the shape of a bow drawn part way, and every horse faces away from the wind. The young stallion with the bay coat paces a few steps one way and then the other, not from nervousness, but from the need to keep his blood moving, and you watch him with a small feeling of approval, noting that he is strong and attentive, a good stallion for his small family. He will keep his mare safe through the night, and you will not need to worry about them. You walk to the edge of the herd and look out across the open steppe to the north, where the snow is falling in a dense curtain that obscures everything beyond a few hundred paces. The ground is white now, the brown grass completely covered, except for a few tall seed heads that poke through the snow and tremble in the wind, casting tiny shadows that shift and disappear. The snow has reached your ankles in the places where the wind does not scour it away, and in the hollows it is deeper, piling up against the low sagebrush and the scattered rocks that dot the landscape. You can see the tracks where you walked earlier beginning to fill in, the sharp edges softening, and soon they will be gone entirely, and the ground will look as if no one has ever walked there at all. You turn and begin to walk back through the herd, retracing your steps, but the snow has already made the ground unfamiliar, and you must rely on the positions of the horses to guide you. Each band is a landmark, the lead mare's grey shape a beacon in the whiteness, and you move from one to the next with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who knows that hurrying in snow only leads to wet boots and cold feet. You pass the young foals again and note that they have not moved, still sleeping, still warm, and you pass the old gelding who stands slightly apart from the others, a horse who was once a riding animal and now spends his days in quiet retirement, tolerated by the mares and ignored by the stallions. He turns his head as you pass and blows a soft breath through his nostrils, and you pause to scratch the rough hair between his ears, a small gesture of affection that he accepts with the patience of the old. The snow continues to fall as you make your way back toward the camp, and you walk with your head slightly bowed, watching the ground appear and disappear beneath your feet. The world is reduced to small things now, the crunch of snow under your boots, the pattern of flakes on your sleeve, the way the cold air feels as it enters your lungs and leaves again as a cloud of white. You breathe slowly and deeply, not because you've been exerting yourself, but because deep breathing is a way of staying calm in the cold, a way of telling your body that everything is fine, that there is no danger, that this is simply another winter storm and you have seen many of them before. Your body believes you, and your heart beats steadily, and your mind settles into that quiet state that comes from doing familiar work in familiar surroundings. You reach the tent and pause outside the door, knocking the snow from your boots against a flat stone that has been placed there for that purpose. The snow is caked on the leather, and you brush it off with a gloved hand, feeling the cold wetness seep through the wool of your glove. Then you loosen the door ties and step inside, and the warmth of the stove wraps around you immediately, making your cheeks flush and your fingers tingle. You close the door behind you and tie it shut, then stand for a moment just inside the entrance, letting the heat settle on your cold skin. The tent looks different now, the dim light from the smoke hole casting a soft grey glow that mingles with the orange light of the stove to create a colour that is neither grey nor orange, but something in between, a warm dusk that fills the small space and makes the felt walls seem closer than they are. You take off your coat and shake it gently, knocking the melted snow onto the carpet where it will dry in the heat, and hang it back on its peg. Your hat comes off next, a felt cap with ear flaps that have become stiff with cold, and you set it near the stove to warm. Your gloves you place on the warm stones that ring the stove's base, and they begin to steam slightly, the moisture rising in thin wisps. You sit down on the layered felt carpets and stretch your legs out in front of you, crossing your ankles and leaning back on your hands. The position is comfortable, one you've taken 1,000 times, and you let your eyes wander over the familiar objects of the tent, the stacked felt blankets in the corner, the leather water bags hanging from the poles, the small wooden chest that holds your few possessions, the iron pot on the stove, the dried bundles of herbs tied to the lattice wall. Each object has its place, and each place has its history, and the whole arrangement is a kind of map of your life, a map drawn in wool and leather and wood. You add a few pieces of dried dung to the stove, placing them carefully on the glowing coals, and watch as the flames lick up around them and catch. The dung burns slowly and steadily, giving off a sweet smoke that smells of grass and summer, and the stove ticks as it heats, a familiar sound that you have heard so often you no longer notice it unless you deliberately listen. You listen now, deliberately, letting the small sounds of the tent fill your ears, the hiss of the snow melting on the stove's warm surface where a few flakes have blown in through the smoke hole, the whisper of the wind outside, the creak of the tent poles as they shift slightly under the pressure of the gusts. You take the pot of water from the stove and pour some into a small clay bowl, then add a pinch of dried herbs from one of the bundles on the wall, crushing them between your fingers and letting the fragments fall into the water. The herbs release a faint fragrance, something like mint and something like sage, and the steam that rises carries the scent to your nose. You drink the warm water slowly, holding the bowl in both hands and feeling the heat pass into your palms and up through your wrists. The warmth spreads through your chest and settles in your stomach, and you close your eyes for a moment, simply breathing and being still. Outside, the snow continues to fall, steady and unhurried. You can hear it now, a soft hissing sound against the felt walls, different from the sound of the wind alone. It is the sound of millions of small flakes striking the wall, melting, and being replaced by more flakes, a constant gentle pressure that wraps the tent in a blanket of white. You think of the horses standing out in this, their coats growing thick with frost, their breath freezing on their whiskers, and you know that you will go out again soon to check on them. But for now you remain where you are, letting the warmth of the stove seep into your bones, storing it up the way the ground stores heat in the summer, to release it slowly through the autumn. After a while you rise and take your coat from its peg, putting it on while it is still warm from the stove. The wool lining feels soft against your neck, and you fasten the leather toggles with fingers that are no longer stiff from the cold. You pull your hat down over your ears and put on your gloves, now dry and warm from their time by the stove, and you step out into the storm once more. The snow has deepened in the short time you were inside, reaching halfway up your shins where it has drifted against the tent, and you lift your feet high with each step, a slow marching walk that carries you back toward the herd. The world outside is quieter now than it was before, the snow absorbing sound the way felt absorbs water, slowly and completely. You can hear your own breathing and the soft crunch of your footsteps, and when you stop walking, you can hear nothing at all except the faint whisper of the falling snow. It is a silence so deep that it seems to have a presence of its own. A weight that presses on your ears and makes you aware of the small sounds inside your own body, the beat of your heart and the rush of blood in your ears. You stand in that silence for a long moment, letting it fill you, and you feel the peace of it settle into your mind like sediment settling to the bottom of a still pool. The horses are still there, dark shapes in the whiteness, and they have not moved except to shift their weight from one leg to another, the small movements of animals conserving warmth. The snow on their backs is several fingers deep now, and it has begun to form a crust on the top where the warmth of their bodies meets the cold air, a thin shell of ice that glazes the surface. You walk among them one by one, touching each horse as you pass, a brief contact that is partly a check and partly a greeting. Some of them turn their heads to look at you, their eyes calm and dark, and some do not move at all, simply accepting your presence as part of the familiar order of things. You find the young foal still asleep, her pale coat now completely covered with snow, so that only the curve of her back shows, a small mound in the whiteness. Her mother stands over her like a roof, her broad body blocking the wind, and she turns her head to blow a warm breath across your face as you approach. The breath smells of grass and warmth, and it fogs in the cold air for a moment before being swept away. You rest your hand on the mare's neck and feel the steady pulse of her blood moving under the skin. A rhythm that is slower than your own, deep and calm. The rhythm of an animal at rest. You stand with her for a while, sharing the silence, and then you move on. The light is fading now, though it is hard to tell because the snow makes the air seem brighter than it is, a diffuse glow that comes from all directions. But the quality of the light has changed, deepened into something heavier, and you know that true darkness is not far off. You finish your circuit of the herd and stop at the edge of the gathered horses, looking back at the way you have come. Your tracks are already filling with snow, the sharp edges softening, and soon they will be invisible, and the herd will seem to stand alone in an unbroken field of white, as if they have always been here and will always be here, patient and enduring, part of the long winter that covers the steppe every year and always will. You walk back to the tent one more time, and as you walk you watch the snow fall, the flakes appearing out of the grey sky and drifting down in their slow spirals, each one following a path that is unique and yet part of a larger pattern. Some land on your sleeve and you see their shapes for a moment before they melt, tiny stars of ice with 6 arms, each one perfect and fragile. Others land on your face and you feel the small cold kiss of their arrival, and then the wetness as they dissolve. The snow is not a storm now, but a steady fall, the kind of snow that can continue for a full day and the full night without letting up, covering the ground deeper and deeper and deeper until the whole world is remade in white. You reach the tent and duck inside, and the warmth welcomes you home. You turn from the herd and begin walking toward the winter camp, following the subtle curve of the low ridge that runs east to west across the grazing ground. The ridge is not tall, rising only a little above the surrounding steppe, but the land folds just enough at its base to create a pocket of still air where the full force of the wind cannot reach. This is the place your family has used for winter shelter as long as anyone can remember, a place chosen not for its beauty or its view, but for the simple fact that the north wind lifts as it strikes the slope, passing over the hollow and leaving the ground in its lee relatively calm. You walk toward it through the deepening snow, your boots leaving prints that fill almost as quickly as you make them, the flakes coming down in a steady curtain that softens every edge. The snow is ankle deep in the hollows now, piling up in the low places where the wind cannot scour it away, but the ground under your feet remains firm, frozen solid by days of cold that preceded the storm. You can feel the hardness of the earth through the soles of your boots, a resilient resistance that tells you the frost has penetrated deep. In a few places, the snow has drifted against tufts of dry grass, forming small waves and ridges that mimic the larger shape of the land, a miniature landscape of white hills and valleys. You step over these drifts without thinking, your body adjusting to the uneven footing with the ease of long practice, while your eyes stay fixed on the grey-brown shape of the tent that is slowly becoming clearer through the falling snow. The tent stands sturdy against the grey sky, its rounded form looking almost like a low hill itself, a man-made echo of the ridge behind it. The felt walls are a patchwork of different shades, some panels older and darker from years of smoke, others newer and lighter where they were replaced last autumn. The smoke hole at the top is capped loosely with a piece of felt that has been folded and weighted down with a flat stone attached to a leather cord, and from the side of this cap a thin wisp of dung smoke leaks out, pale against the grey air, torn away immediately by the gusts that curl over the ridge and down into the sheltered hollow. The smoke smells sweet and earthy, the familiar scent of burning horse dung that you have associated with home since your earliest memories. You pause for a moment to look at the tent, noting the way the walls bow slightly outward in the middle, and the way the ropes that anchor the structure to the ground are still taut despite the weather. You begin to circle the camp slowly, walking the perimeter that you have walked hundreds of times before, a path that is worn into the grass under the snow, invisible now but still present in your muscle memory. The tent is not large, just wide enough to sleep several people and tall enough to stand upright in the center, and you make the circuit with measured steps, stopping at each tie to check its condition. The ties are leather straps that hold the felt panels to the wooden lattice beneath, a crisscrossing framework of willow poles that has been lashed together with sinew and old hide. At each intersection where a strap passes through the felt and around a lattice pole, you stop and press your gloved hand against the leather, feeling its texture through the wool. The straps are cold and stiff from the weather, but they are dry and tight with no give when you pull on them. You work your way around the tent methodically, starting at the north side where the wind strikes hardest and moving east, then south, then west, your hands touching each tie in turn, your mind registering the small details of their condition without any sense of urgency or concern. The wooden pegs that hold the bottom edge of the felt to the ground are also secure, driven deep into the frozen earth before the cold set in and now locked in place by the frost. You kick gently at one of them with your boot, not hard enough to loosen it, just a test of its hold, and it does not move. The snow has drifted against the base of the tent in a few places, piling up where the wind eddies around the curve of the wall, and you use the side of your boot to scrape some of it away, clearing a shallow trench that will prevent the snow from building up and pressing against the felt as it accumulates through the night. The snow moves easily, still light and dry, and it scatters in a small cloud that the wind catches and carries off. You continue your slow walk around the tent, your head bent against the wind when you pass the north side, and lifted again when you move into the shelter of the south, and you notice the small things that always need attention after a storm has passed. The leather cord that holds the smoke hole cap in place is frayed slightly near the knot, not enough to be a danger, but enough to make a mental note for later repair. The felt panel on the western wall has a small tear near the bottom, an old one that you stitched closed last winter, and the stitches are holding well, the sinews still tight, and the edges of the felt still drawn together. You touch the repair with your fingers, tracing the line of stitches through your glove, and you remember the evening you made them, sitting by the stove while the wind howled outside, much as it is doing now. The tent door is on the south side, facing away from the wind, and you stop there for a moment, looking out across the white expanse of the steppe, toward the dark shapes of the herd still standing in their line. You can see them through the snow, distant but visible, their forms blurred and softened by the falling flakes, and the sight of them reassures you in a way that is too deep for words. Then you turn to the small stack of dried horse dung that sits beside the tent, a pile that you built up in the autumn when the weather was still warm and the horses were still grazing the dry grass of the late season. The pile is covered with a piece of old felt, weighted down with stones and bones, and you pull back the cover carefully, exposing the dark, dried bricks beneath. The dung is well cured, several months old, having dried in the sun and wind of late summer and early autumn until it is hard and light and almost odorless. You gather an armload of it, choosing the pieces that are whole and dry, stacking them in the crook of your elbow as if you were gathering firewood. The dung is warm where it has been protected from the weather, not warm in the way the stove is warm, but warm relative to the freezing air, and you can feel the faint residual heat of its composting life through your coat sleeve. The smell of it rises as you move the pieces, a dry, grassy scent that reminds you of meadows and sunshine and the long days of summer when the horses grazed on the open steppe. You take a full armload, enough to feed the stove through several hours of darkness, and you carry it to the tent door, ducking low to enter. Inside, the tent is dim and still, the only light coming from the small window of the stove door where the coals glow orange-red. The air is noticeably warmer, wrapping around you as you straighten up inside, and you pause for a moment to let your eyes adjust to the half-dark. The interior smells of wool and smoke and old hay dust, the layered sense of a dwelling that has been lived in for many seasons, each one adding its own small contribution to the atmosphere. The felt carpets on the floor are a mix of old and new, some of them worn smooth and thin by years of use, others still thick and springy underfoot. The wooden lattice of the walls is visible in places where the felt has been pulled back, and the poles of the roof radiate upward from the central ring like the spokes of a wheel, their ends lashed together with leather strips that creak softly when the wind shakes the tent. You carry the armload of dung across the small space and place it near the iron stove, stacking the pieces neatly beside the small pile that is already there. The stove itself is a squat, heavy thing, made of iron that has been blackened by years of fire and polished in places by the touch of hands and pots. It sits on a flat stone that protects the felt carpets from the heat, and its chimney pipe rises straight up through the smoke hole, surrounded by a collar of leather that keeps the snow from blowing in. You open the small door at the front and look inside, seeing the bed of coals still glowing, still feeding a low flame that licks lazily around the last piece of dung you placed there before going out. You add 2 new pieces, placing them carefully on top of the coals, and then you close the door and listen to the fire begin to work on the fresh fuel, a soft crackling sound that joins the whisper of the wind. You stand for a moment, letting the warmth seep into your hands and your face, and then you move to the center of the tent and sit down on the layered felt carpets, crossing your legs and resting your hands on your knees. The position is comfortable and familiar, the same position you have taken countless times when resting between tasks, and you let your body settle into it with a small sigh that you do not consciously make. The wind presses against the tent walls, making them breathe in and out in a slow rhythm that is almost like the breathing of a large animal at rest, and the tent poles creak softly with each gust, a sound that is so familiar it is almost a kind of silence. You close your eyes and listen to the wind, feeling the small movements of the tent through the floor beneath you, and you let your mind drift into that quiet space that comes from being warm and sheltered while the storm continues outside. The stove ticks as it heats, a sharp little sound that happens every few moments, and the water pot on top of it makes a gentle bubbling noise, the water simmering softly. A strand of dried herb that hangs from the lattice wall sways slightly in the draft from the smoke hole, casting a moving shadow on the felt that you can see even through your closed eyelids. You open your eyes and watch the shadow for a moment, tracking its slow back and forth motion, and then you let your gaze wander over the other objects in the tent. The stack of felt blankets in the corner, the leather water bags hanging from the poles, the small wooden chest that holds your sewing kit and your spare knife, and the few other possessions that make up your life. Each object has a history, a story that you could tell if there was someone to listen, but for now the stories remain unspoken, held in the quiet of the tent, like seeds held in frozen ground. You sit for a while longer, not measuring the time, simply resting and letting your body absorb the warmth it will need for the hours ahead. Outside, the snow continues to fall, and you can hear it against the felt walls, a soft, persistent hissing that mingles with the wind and the stove and the slow beat of your own heart. The day has faded almost entirely now, the grey light of afternoon giving way to the deeper darkness of early evening, and the interior of the tent has grown dimmer still, the orange glow of the stove, the only source of light. You think about lighting the small oil lamp that sits on the wooden chest, but you do not, because the darkness is comfortable and the firelight is enough to see by if you need to see. Your thoughts drift, as they always do in these quiet moments, to the things that need to be done and the things that have already been done, and they settle on the horses standing out in the storm. You know they are fine, you have just checked them, and you will check them again soon. but the knowledge of their presence is always in the back of your mind, a constant companion that has been with you since you were old enough to understand what it means to be responsible for a herd. Being a herder is not a task that ends when you come inside. It is a state of being, a way of existing in the world that continues even when you are sleeping. You do not mind this, you have never minded it, because the horses are not a burden to you, they are simply a part of your life. The way the steppe is a part of your life, and the sky is a part of your life, and the long winter storms are a part of your life. After a time you rise from the felt carpets, your body moving before your mind has fully decided to move, and you reach for your coat that hangs on its peg. The coat is still warm from the stove, and you put it on slowly, fastening the leather toggles one by one from bottom to top. Your hat comes next, the felt cap with the ear flaps that you pull down over your ears, and then your gloves, still dry and warm from their time by the stove. You pause at the door, your hand on the felt flap, and you take a last look around the tent, the dim space that has been your home through many winters and will be your home through many more. The stove glows quietly, the water pot steams gently, the shadows sway on the walls, and everything is in its place, calm and still and waiting. You untie the leather thongs that hold the door closed and push aside the felt flap, ducking through the low entrance and stepping back out into the storm. The cold hits your face immediately, a sharp, clean sensation that makes your eyes water for a moment before they adjust, and the snow swirls around you in a dense dance of white. You tie the door closed from the outside, pulling the thongs tight and knotting them securely, and then you turn to face the herd again. The horses are still there, dark shapes in the deeper darkness of the night, and they need you, not urgently but steadily, the way the fire needs fuel and the grass needs sun, a need that is simple and constant and will not end until the storm ends. You walk toward them through the deepening snow, your boots making fresh tracks over the old ones that have already been filled and erased, and you feel the night settle around you like a second coat, heavy and cold and full of the long patience of winter. You walk to the hay store, which sits a short distance from the tent on the southern side of the camp, a low stack of cut grass covered by a thick layer of weathered felt. The hay store is not a structure, but a pile, carefully shaped and pressed down so that the rain and snow run off its sloped sides rather than soaking through to the grass inside. The felt that covers it is old and heavy, dark brown with age and mottled with patches of lighter wool where repairs were made in previous years. It is weighted down around the edges with stones of various sizes, rounded river rocks that were carried here from a distant creek bed generations ago, as well as with old bones from sheep and horses, their surfaces smoothed by weather and time until they shine faintly even in the dim light. You know each stone and each bone by sight, having placed them yourself in the autumn when the hay was first stacked, and you see that none of them have shifted despite the wind that has been pressing against the pile all afternoon. You kneel beside the hay store and begin to lift the stones one by one, setting them aside in a small cluster on the snow. The stones are cold and heavy, their surfaces dusted with a fine layer of dry snow that brushes off against your gloves. You work slowly, moving from one edge of the felt cover to the other, loosening the weights that hold it down against the wind. The felt itself is stiff with cold, and when you lift a corner, it makes a low crackling sound, the frozen wool fibers separating from each other. Underneath the felt is a second layer, an older piece of hide that is being oiled with mutton fat to repel moisture, and beneath that is the hay itself, pale gold and fragrant, smelling of the summer meadow where it was cut. The hay is a mix of grasses, some of them tall and stemmy, others finer and softer, all of them dried to a uniform pale color that reminds you of the light on a clear autumn afternoon. You reach down and take a handful, feeling the stems crackle slightly in your grip, and you lift it to your nose to breathe in the scent. The smell is sweet and dusty, the concentrated essence of warm days and growing things, and it fills your head with memories of the cutting season, the swing of the scythe, the long lines of grass falling in swaths, the women and children raking it into rows, the horses watching from the far side of the meadow as their winter food was gathered. You return the handful to the pile and brush the chaff from your gloves, then reach for the large woven net that lies folded beside the hay store. The net is made of thick woolen cord, knotted into a mesh that is loose enough to let air pass through, but tight enough to hold the hay without spilling too much. You shake it out and spread it on the snow beside the pile, smoothing the corners with your hands until it lies flat. Then you begin to fill it, pulling armloads of hay from the stack and placing them in the center of the net. The hay rustles as you move it, a dry papery sound that is one of the familiar noises of winter, and small bits of chaff and dust rise into the air, catching the light and drifting slowly down to settle on the snow. You work steadily, taking your time because there is no reason to hurry, and because hurrying would only scatter the hay and waste the summer's work. Each armload is a mix of stems and leaves, some of them still showing the faint green color that they held when they were cut, a color that has been preserved by the dry cold of the steppe autumn. You place the hay in the net with a kind of care, not because the hay is fragile, but because the act of handling it is part of the rhythm of the day, a rhythm that you have followed since you were old enough to help with the winter feeding. The net fills slowly, the pile of hay rising in its center until it makes a small mound that is roughly the size of a sheep. You judge the amount by eye and by the feel of the weight when you lift a corner of the net, and when you decide that you have enough, you stop and tie the corners together with a leather cord that is attached to one end. The bundle is heavy but not too heavy, a weight that settles against your back with a familiar pressure. You lift it by the tied corners and swing it onto your shoulder, adjusting the position until the weight is balanced and the cord does not dig into your neck. Then you turn and begin to walk toward the herd, bending slightly forward into the wind, your boots sinking into the snow with each step. The hay bundle bounces gently against your back as you walk, and you can feel the individual stems shifting inside the net, settling into new positions. A few loose pieces escape through the mesh and blow away on the wind, small flecks of gold against the white snow, and you let them go without concern, because there is always some loss in the carrying and because the herd will have enough. The walk to the herd is not long, perhaps 100 paces, but in the falling snow it feels longer, the world reduced to a small white tunnel that moves with you. You can see the dark shapes of the horses ahead, still standing in their loose line, still facing away from the wind, and you steer toward them with the certainty of someone who has walked this ground in every season and every weather. The snow is deeper now, reaching past your ankles, and your footsteps make a soft, crunching sound that is quickly muffled by the snow that fills them in. You breathe steadily, your breath forming clouds that are swept away by the wind, and you feel the warmth of the hay against your back, the stored warmth of summer carried into the heart of winter. The horses see you coming, their heads lifting slightly, their ears pricking forward. Some of the older ones take a few steps in your direction, recognizing the shape of the hay net and the familiar rhythm of your approach. They do not rush or push. They simply move forward with the slow deliberation of animals who know that food is coming and that there is no need to compete for it. The lead mare is among them, her grey coat now thick with frost, and she walks to meet you with the calm authority that she carries in every situation. You stop a short distance from the herd and lower the hay bundle from your shoulder, setting it on the snow and untying the leather cord that holds it closed. You choose a place to spread the hay, a slight depression in the ground on the leeward side of the herd where the snow is thinner because the wind has scoured it away. The depression is not deep, just a gentle hollow that catches the snow lightly, and its bottom is still visible as a patch of darker ground under the white. You drag the net to this spot and open it, spreading the hay in a long line that follows the curve of the hollow. The hay spills out in a loose golden ribbon, the stems falling over each other and settling into the snow, and the smell of dried grass rises strong and sweet in the cold air. You shake the net to release the last pieces, then fold it and tuck it under your arm. The horses move forward as you step back, their heads lowering to the hay with a quiet, low sound of satisfaction that is not quite a nicker and not quite a sigh, something in between that you have heard many times before. Their breath puffs white as they nose through the offering, their soft muzzles sorting the stems and leaves, their teeth making a gentle grinding sound as they chew. The lead mare takes her place at the center of the line, and the others arrange themselves around her, the mares with their foals beside them, and the young stallion at the outer edge keeping a small distance from the rest. They eat slowly, taking their time, because hay in winter is not just food, but a kind of comfort, a reminder of the green world that waits beneath the snow. You stand nearby and watch them, your hands tucked into your sleeves and your weight settled evenly on both feet. The snow continues to fall around you, landing on the horses' backs and on the hay and on your own shoulders, and you do not brush it away. The act of feeding the herd is a simple one, a task that takes only a small part of the day, but the watching that follows it is its own kind of work, a quiet vigilance that keeps you standing in the cold long after the hay has been eaten. You are looking for signs, small things that might tell you something about the condition of each animal, the way a mare chews, the way a foal moves around its mother, the way the old gelding holds his head. Each observation is a piece of the larger picture that you carry in your mind, a picture of the herd's health and well-being that is always being updated and refined. The hay disappears slowly, stem by stem, and the horses begin to lift their heads again, their muzzles dusted with chaff and their breath still steaming. Some of them lick the snow where the hay has been, picking up the last small fragments of grass that have fallen into the white. Others simply stand and gaze into the distance, their eyes half closed and their ears relaxed, the posture of animals who have been fed and are now content. The foals are the last to finish, their small mouths working more slowly than those of the adults, and you watch one little colt nuzzle at his mother's jaw, asking for a taste of the milk that she still carries for him, even in winter. You remain with the herd for a while longer, walking slowly among them as they settle back into their patient line. The hay has warmed them from the inside, and you can feel the difference in the way they stand, a little more relaxed, a little more deeply settled into the snow. You pass the old gelding and stop to scratch the rough hair behind his ears, a small gesture of affection that he accepts with his head lowered and his eyes half closed. His winter coat is thick and shaggy, and under it you can feel the hard shape of his skull and the warmth of his blood moving close to the surface. He has been with the herd for many years, this old horse, and you have known him since you were young, and he was young, and now you are both older and slower, and still here, still standing in the snow, while the winter wind blows. You think about the hay that you have just fed, and about the hay that is still stacked under the felt cover back at the camp. There is enough, because you cut enough in the summer, and because the herd is not so large that they will empty the stack before the spring grass comes. The calculation is one that you make without numbers, a simple knowing that comes from years of watching the hay pile shrink and the snow pile grow. Your uncle used to say that a herder should never count the hay in the middle of winter, because counting only makes you worry, and worrying does not make the hay last any longer. You have followed this advice without thinking about it, trusting the summer's work to carry you through the winter's cold. The light is almost gone now, the grey of the afternoon deepening into the darker grey of evening, and the snow has not let up. It falls steadily, the flakes still small and dry, still riding the slanting wind from the northeast, and the ground is now a smooth white expanse that hides all the familiar landmarks. You know where you are, though, because you know the shape of the land under the snow, the way the ridge rises to the north and the hollow dips to the south, and the flat grazing ground stretches out to the east. You can feel these shapes through your boots, through the subtle changes in the slope of the ground, and you navigate by them the way a horse navigates by the smell of water or the memory of grass. You fold the hay net and tuck it under your arm, then turn and begin to walk back toward the camp. Your tracks from earlier are completely gone, filled in by the steady snowfall, and you make new ones that will also be gone before morning. The walk back feels shorter than the walk out, as it always does, because the work is done and the herd is fed, and the only thing left is to return to the warmth of the tent and the quiet of the stove. You walk with your head slightly bowed, watching the snow appear and disappear under your boots, and you let your mind drift into that calm space that comes after a task is completed, a space where there is nothing to plan and nothing to worry about, only the simple rhythm of walking through the winter night. The tent comes into view through the falling snow, a darker shape against the dark sky, and you see the faint orange glow of the stove light through the felt walls, a small beacon that has guided you home many times before. You approach the door and pause to knot the snow from your boots against the flat stone, then loosen the thongs and step inside, ducking low through the entrance and straightening up into the warmth. The interior of the tent feels almost hot after the cold outside, and your cheeks flush immediately, the blood rushing back to the surface of your skin. You close the door and tie it shut, then stand for a moment just inside the entrance, letting the heat settle on your cold face and hands. The stove is still burning well, the dung you added earlier now reduced to a bed of glowing coals that radiate a steady warmth. You hang the hay net on a peg near the door, where it will dry and be ready for the next feeding, and you take off your coat and hat and gloves, hanging them on their pegs and spreading the gloves on the warm stones beside the stove. The water pot on the stove is simmering gently, and you take it by the handle and pour some of the hot water into a clay bowl, then set it on the carpet to cool. You sit down on the layered felts, crossing your legs and resting your hands on your knees, and you let the warmth seep into your body while the wind sings its low song against the tent walls. You think about the herd, standing out in the snow with their bellies full of hay, their thick coats holding in the warmth, their patient bodies enduring the long night. They are fine, you know, because you have done what needed to be done, and because the horses know how to take care of themselves, given a little help from the herder. The partnership is an old one, older than anyone can remember, and it works because both sides understand their part. You will go out again later, before the deep hours of the night, to check on them once more, but for now you sit in the warmth of the tent and listen to the snow falling softly on the felt roof, and think about nothing in particular. Your mind is quiet and still as the winter steppe under its blanket of white. Daylight begins to drain from the sky without a sunset, without any of the colors that mark the end of a clear day. There is no orange glow on the horizon, no band of red or pink stretching along the edge of the steppe, only a gradual deepening of gray into a heavier gray, as if the whole sky is slowly closing its eyes. You notice the change while you are still outside, still walking among the horses after the hay feeding, and you pause to look up at the cloud layer that has been sitting over the land all day. The clouds are thick and low, their undersides smooth and featureless, and they seem to press down on the world with a gentle weight, narrowing the space between earth and sky until the steppe feels small and enclosed. You walk the perimeter of the herd once more, a slow circuit that takes you around the outer edge of the gathered horses, and as you walk you watch the light fade in the same way you might watch water slowly draining from a bowl. The snow continues to fall through the dimming air, the flakes, still small and dry, still riding the slanting wind, and they seem to glow faintly against the darkening sky, catching the last of the diffused light and holding it for a moment before they touch the ground. The world is all shades of grey and white now, the brown grass completely buried, the dark shapes of the horses, the only contrast against the snow. You note with quiet satisfaction that the foals are tucked close against their mothers, each small body pressed into the shelter of a larger one, sheltered from the wind by the warm, broad flanks of the mares. The foals have finished nursing and now stand with their heads low and their eyes half closed, their thick baby coats puffed out against the cold, their small tails clamped down against their hind quarters. One little filly has her nose buried in the thick hair of her mother's side, breathing in the warm scent of her dam while she dozes, and you pause to look at her for a moment, remembering when she was born in the spring. A wet, slippery creature struggling to stand on legs that seemed too long for her body. Now she is round and sturdy, her coat dense and fluffy, and she will come through the winter well. The mares stand with a patience that seems limitless, their large bodies blocking the wind for their young, their heads turned slightly to keep one eye on the foals and one eye on the world around them. You've always admired the way a mare will position herself in a storm, always with her hindquarters to the wind and her foal on the sheltered side, always aware of the angle of the cold and the direction of the snow. It is not something that is taught, you think, but something that is simply known, passed down through the long line of mares that stretches back into the deep past of the steppe. You rest your hand on the grey led mare's shoulder as you pass, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, and she turns her head to look at you with her calm dark eye, acknowledging your presence without moving from her place. The sound of the herd at rest is a soft chorus of small noises that blend together into a kind of quiet music. You can hear the horses breathing, the deep, slow inhale and exhale of many large animals standing still, their breath puffing white in the cold air. You can hear the occasional stamp of a hoof as a horse shifts its weight, the soft thud of the hoof on the snow-covered ground, and the rustle of a coat being shaken briefly before the horse settles again. You can hear the low rumbling sound of a mare calling softly to her foal, a sound that is not quite a whinny, but something deeper and gentler, a private communication between mother and child that you have heard 1,000 times and will hear 1,000 more. And beneath all these sounds is the whisper of the falling snow, the constant soft hiss of flakes landing on flakes, a sound so steady and so pervasive that it becomes a kind of silence after a while. You stop at the edge of the herd and look back toward the camp, toward the tent that sits in its sheltered hollow against the ridge. In the fading light, the tent is now only a darker shape against the dark ground, its rounded form barely visible through the falling snow. But you can see a faint orange glow through the felt walls, a small warm light that marks the place where the stove is burning. The sight of it tugs at something in your chest, a feeling that is not quite homesickness because you are not far from home, but something more like the quiet pleasure of knowing that warmth and shelter are waiting for you when you are ready to return. You have felt this feeling many times, standing out in the cold and looking at the lit tent, and it never grows old or familiar in a way that diminishes it. You decide to return to the tent for a time, to warm your hands and prepare a meal, to sit by the stove and let the heat soak into your bones. The decision is not urgent. It is simply the next thing to do in the long sequence of small tasks that make up a winter day, and you make it with the same calm deliberation that you bring to every decision. You turn from the herd and begin to walk toward the tent, your boots sinking into the snow that is now well past your ankles, your path a straight line across the white ground. The snow muffles your footsteps, absorbing the sound of your movement, and you walk in a silence that is broken only by the soft crunch of the snow compressing under your weight and the steady whisper of your breath. Halfway to the tent, you stop and turn around, looking back at the herd one more time before the darkness becomes complete. The horses are still there, their dark shapes now blended together into a single long mass, like a low hill that has risen out of the snow. You count them automatically, your eyes moving from one end of the line to the other, touching each shape and registering it. And you come up with the same number you have had all day. The count settles in your mind and stays there, a quiet reassurance that everything is as it should be. You turn back toward the tent and continue walking, your head bent slightly against the wind, your eyes on the orange glow that grows brighter as you approach. The tent feels different when you reach it, not in any physical way, but in the way it welcomes you, the warmth of the stove reaching out to meet you as you loosen the door ties and step inside. You duck through the low entrance and straighten up into the dim interior, and the heat wraps around you immediately, making your cold cheeks flush and your fingers tingle inside your gloves. You close the door and tie it shut, then stand for a moment just inside the entrance, letting the transition from cold to warm happen slowly, the way you let a horse cool down gradually after a long ride. The contrast is one of the small pleasures of winter, the feeling of returning to shelter after being out in the weather, and you let yourself enjoy it for moments before you move. The tent is dim, lit only by the orange glow of the stove and the faint grey light that filters through the smoke hole, but it is bright enough for you to see the familiar shapes of your belongings. You take off your coat and hang it on its peg, then your hat and gloves, spreading the gloves on the warm stones beside the stove where they will dry. You sit down on the layered felt carpets and unlace your boots, pulling them off and setting them near the stove to warm. They're not too close because wet leather can crack if it dries too fast. Your feet in their thick wool socks are cold, but not numb, and you flex your toes inside the socks, feeling the circulation return. You add a few pieces of dried dung to the stove, placing them carefully on the bed of coals, and you watch as the flames lick up around them and catch. The fire brightens for a moment, filling the tent with a warm orange light that dances on the curved walls, and then it settles back into a steady glow. You put the water pot on the stove to heat, listening to the hiss as the water begins to warm, and you take out a leather bag of dried curd and a piece of hard flatbread from the wooden chest. The flatbread is round and dense, made from ground wild grains and water, baked on a hot stone until it is crisp on the outside and chewy on the inside. You break off a piece and hold it in your mouth to soften before chewing, and the taste is mild and nutty, the taste of autumn and careful storage. You eat slowly, sitting cross-legged on the felt carpets, your back resting against a folded blanket. The curd is salty and hard, and you let each piece dissolve on your tongue before you swallow, taking your time with the meal the way you take your time with everything in winter. There is no reason to hurry, no task that cannot wait, and the slow pace of eating is itself a kind of rest, a way of telling your body that the day's urgent work is done and that now is the time for stillness. The wind outside sings its low steady note against the tent ropes, and the walls breathe in and out slightly with the gusts, and you feel the peace of the evening settle over you like a second blanket. You finish your meal and pour some of the hot water from the pot into a clay bowl, then add a pinch of dried herbs, crushing them between your fingers and letting the fragments fall into the water. The herbs release their fragrance, something like mint and something like the wild thyme that grows on the south-facing slopes in summer, and the steam that rises carries the scent to your nose. You hold the bowl in both hands, feeling the warmth pass into your palms, and you take small sips of the herb water, letting the heat spread down your throat and into your chest. The liquid is mild and comforting, not a medicine, but a comfort, something warm to drink while the wind blows outside. You close your eyes for a moment, not sleeping, just resting, and you listen to the sounds of the tent. The stove ticks as it heats, a sharp little sound that happens every few moments. The water pot hisses softly, a few drops spilling over the side and sizzling on the hot iron. The wind presses against the felt walls, making them creak and rustle, and the ropes that anchor the tent to the ground hum slightly as they vibrate in the gusts. These sounds are so familiar that they are almost a part of you, the background noise of your life, and they wrap around you like the warmth of the stove, steady and calming and utterly reliable. You think about the night ahead, about the hours of darkness that are still to come, and about the checks you will make on the herd before morning. You will go out again soon, before the deep cold of the early morning sets in, and you will walk among the horses and make sure they are all still comfortable, still standing with their backs to the wind, still breathing their slow, steady breaths. Then you will come back inside and warm yourself again, and you will repeat this cycle through the night, as you have done through every winter storm, for as long as you have been a herder. The rhythm of it is ingrained in you, a pattern that your body knows as well as it knows the rhythm of your own heartbeat. You open your eyes and look around the tent, at the familiar objects that surround you, each one in its place, each one with its own small history. The wooden chest that holds your sewing kit was made by your grandfather, the joints fitted together without nails, the lid worn smooth by years of opening and closing. The felt carpets on the floor were made by your mother and your aunts, the wool beaten and rolled and pressed until it became thick and dense and warm. The iron stove was traded for 3 good horses from a trader who came through the summer camp many years ago, and it has kept your family warm through countless cold nights. Every object in the tent carries a story, and the stories blend together into the larger story of your life, a story that is still being written with each passing day. The darkness outside is complete now. The last of the grey light faded into black, and the only light in the tent is the orange glow of the stove and the small flicker of the flames through the stove door. You rise from the felt carpets and walk to the door, loosening the ties and pushing aside the flap to look out at the night. The snow is still falling, the flakes now visible only as a faint movement in the darkness, a pale swirling against the black sky. The air is cold and sharp, and it stings your cheeks as you stand in the doorway, but the wind has dropped slightly, settling into a steady breeze rather than the gusts that were blowing earlier. You can see nothing beyond a few paces, the world reduced to the small circle of snow that is lit by the faint glow from the tent door, but you know that the herd is out there, standing patient and still, and the knowledge is enough. You close the door and tie it shut, then return to your place by the stove. You add a few more pieces of dung to the fire, banking it for the hours ahead, and you pour yourself another bowl of herb water. The night stretches out before you, long and dark and quiet, and you settle into it the way you settle into a saddle, with a sense of balance and a quiet readiness. You will rest now, not sleeping, but not fully awake either, drifting in that space between where the mind is calm and the body is still, and when it is time to go out again, you will go, because that is what a herder does, and that is what you have always done. You enter the tent and close the felt door flap behind you, pulling it snug against the wooden frame and reaching for the leather thongs that hold it shut. The thongs are worn soft from years of tying and untying, their ends frayed into small brushes of sinew, and they pass through your fingers with the familiarity of old friends. You tie them securely, a simple knot that will hold against the wind but release easily when you need to go out again, and you test the knot with a gentle tug, finding it firm. The wind outside presses against the door flap immediately, as if it has been waiting, and the felt bulges inward slightly before settling back, the leather ties creaking with the strain. You turn from the door and face the interior of the tent, letting your eyes adjust to the warm dimness after the grey-white glare of the snow. The space is small but not cramped, a circle of felt and wood that holds the heat of the stove close like a cupped hand holds a flame. The curved walls rise from the ground to a height just above your head at the center, and the roof poles radiate upward from the walls to the smoke hole ring, their dark wooden lengths crossed and lashed with leather strips. The felt lining of the walls is a patchwork of different shades, some panels a deep smoky brown, others a lighter tan where they were replaced in recent years, and the seams between them are stitched with sinew in neat even lines that your mother made long ago. The stove sits in the center of the tent on its flat stone base, a squat iron box with a small door at the front and a chimney pipe that rises straight up through the smoke hole. The iron is blackened from years of fire, but in places where pots and hands have rubbed against it, there is a dull gleam, a polished darkness that catches the orange light of the coals inside. You kneel beside the stove and open the small door, peering in at the bed of embers that glows like a handful of rubies scattered on a dark cloth. The coals are still hot, still feeding a low flame that licks lazily around the edges of the last piece of dung you placed there before going out, and you add 2 more pieces now, placing them carefully on top of the embers and watching as the heat begins to work on them. The fresh dung catches slowly, the way dried dung always does, with a thin curl of smoke that rises from the surface before the first small flame appears. The smoke is sweet and pale, smelling of grass and summer meadows, and it drifts upward through the chimney pipe, drawn by the cold air outside that pulls the warm air from the tent. You close the stove door and listen to the fire settle into its new fuel, a soft crackling sound that is one of the most comforting sounds you know, a sound that means warmth and shelter and the long, patient work of winter. You take off your outer coat, which is stiff with cold and dusted with snow that has not yet melted, and you shake it gently over the felt carpet near the door. The snow falls from the wool in small clumps and lands on the carpet, where it sits for a moment as white patches before beginning to darken and shrink as the warmth of the tent reaches it. You hang the coat on its wooden peg, driven into the lattice wall, smoothing the sleeves so that they will dry without creasing, and you notice the familiar smell of the wool, a blend of sheep lanolin and wood smoke and cold fresh air that is the scent of your coat and no other. Your hat comes off next, the felt cap with the ear flaps that have become stiff with cold during your time outside. The felt is beaded with tiny droplets of melted snow, and you shake it gently before setting it on the warm stones that ring the base of the stove. The stones are smooth and dark, river rocks that were gathered from a creek bed many summers ago and carried here to hold the heat of the stove and radiate it slowly through the night. They are warm to the touch but not hot, and your hat settles onto them with a faint hiss as the moisture begins to evaporate. Your gloves go beside the hat, spread flat with the fingers pointing toward the stove so they will dry evenly. The gloves are made of felted wool with a leather palm stitched on, and the leather is dark with use and polished smooth by the countless times you've gripped ropes and halters and hay nets. You flex your fingers now that they are free, feeling the slight stiffness in the joints from the cold, and you hold your hands out toward the stove, letting the radiant warmth wash over them. The heat is a gentle pressure against your skin, and you watch the color return to your fingertips, the pale whiteness giving way to a healthy pink. You sit down on the layered felt carpets, crossing your legs and settling your weight onto the thick wool, and you begin to unlace your boots. The laces are leather thongs that have been greased with mutton fat to keep them supple, and they slide through the eyelets easily, despite the cold. You work the boots off one at a time, pulling them by the heels, and you set them near the stove to warm, though not too close because wet leather can crack if it dries too fast, and because your uncle taught you long ago to treat your boots well, and they would treat you well in return. Your feet in their thick wool socks are cold, the toes slightly numb, and you rub them with your hands for a moment, feeling the circulation begin to return with a faint tingling sensation. The stove is burning well now, the fresh dung fully caught and glowing, and the warmth in the tent has increased noticeably. You can feel it on your face and your hands and seeping through the wool of your socks to your feet, and you can see it in the way the air inside the tent has taken on a slight shimmer, a heat haze that makes the far wall look soft and slightly out of focus. The water pot on the stove is simmering, the water inside making a gentle bubbling sound, and you watch the steam rise from the spout in a thin white column that twists and dissipates near the smoke hole. You take the pot from the stove using a folded piece of felt to protect your hand, and you pour some of the hot water into a clay bowl. The bowl is small and heavy, its rim worn smooth by years of use, its inside glazed a deep brown from the tannins of countless herb infusions. You add a pinch of dried herbs from one of the bundles hanging on the lattice wall, crushing them between your fingers and letting the fragments fall into the water, where they float for a moment on the surface, before beginning to sink and steep. The herbs release their scent into the steam, a fragrance that is green and sharp and somehow warm all at once, and you lift a bowl to your face and breathe it in, letting the smell fill your nose and your lungs. You take a sip of the herb water, small and careful, because it is still very hot, and you feel the warmth travel down your throat and into your chest, spreading outward like the heat from the stove. The taste is mild and slightly bitter, the taste of wild plants gathered in the summer and dried in the sun, and it is a taste you have known all your life, a taste that means winter and warmth, and the quiet hours inside the tent. You hold the bowl in both hands and take another sip, and then you set it on the carpet beside you to cool a little more. From the wooden chest in the corner, you take out a small leather pouch that holds dried curd, the hard, pale yellow pieces clacking softly against each other as you move the pouch. You select a piece about the size of your thumb and put it in your mouth, letting it sit on your tongue for a moment to soften before you begin to chew. The curd is salty and dense, and it takes a long time to dissolve, releasing its flavor slowly as you work it with your teeth. You take a piece of flatbread from the cloth wrapping in the chest, breaking off a corner and eating it with the curd, the two flavors complementing each other in a way that is simple and satisfying. You eat slowly, without hurry, because there is no reason to eat quickly when the night stretches out long ahead of you, and the only task remaining is to rest and to check on the herd at intervals. The act of eating is a quiet pleasure, one of the small comforts of the winter day, and you let yourself enjoy it fully, noticing the texture of the bread and the saltiness of the curd and the warmth of the herb water as you sip it between bites. Outside, the wind continues its low song, a steady note that rises and falls in small variations, and the tent walls breathe in and out with the gusts, a motion so gentle that it is almost imperceptible unless you are sitting still and paying attention. You finish your meal and brush the crumbs from your lap onto the felt carpet, where they will be shaken out in the morning, or perhaps eaten by the small mice that sometimes find their way into the tent in search of warmth and food. You do not mind the mice, they are part of the winter world, just as the horses are, and the snow is, and they do no real harm. You pour yourself a second bowl of herb water and settle back against the folded blanket that serves as a backrest, stretching your legs out in front of you and crossing your ankles. The tent is quiet now. The only sounds the hiss of the stove and the whisper of the wind and the soft creak of the tent poles as they shift slightly under the pressure of the gusts. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to rest your eyes from the dim light, and you let your mind drift into that calm space between waking and sleeping, where thoughts become loose and easy, floating through your awareness without demanding attention. You think about the summer meadow where the hay was cut, remembering the sound of the scythe and the smell of the cut grass and the way the horses grazed on the far side of the meadow, watching the haymaking with mild curiosity. You think about the autumn migration, the slow journey from the summer camp to the winter camp, the herd moving in a long line across the yellowing steppe while the cranes flew overhead in their own long lines, heading south. You think about the spring that will come eventually, the snow melting into the ground, and the first green shoots pushing up through the wet earth, and the foals running in circles on legs that are suddenly strong and fast. These thoughts come and go without effort, rising and falling like the wind outside, and you do not try to hold on to them or push them away. You simply let them be, the same way you let the horses be, standing patient in the snow while the storm passes over them. After a while, you open your eyes and look around the tent, and everything is the same as it was before, the stove still glowing, the water pot still steaming, the shadows still swaying gently on the felt walls. Nothing has changed, and nothing needs to change, and the peace of that knowledge settles into you like a stone settling into the bottom of a still pool. You reach for your coat, which has been warming by the door, and you put it on again, fastening the toggles one by one. The coat is dry now and warm, the wool soft against your neck, and it carries the smell of the stove smoke and the felt tent and your own body, a combination that is the smell of home. You put on your hat and your gloves, which are dry and warm from their time by the stove, and you step to the door and loosen the ties. The cold air rushes in as you push aside the flap, sharp and clean, and you duck through the entrance and out into the night, leaving the warm tent behind you, knowing that you will return to it again and again through the long hours of darkness. You rise from the felt carpets and put on your coat again, the wool now warm from its time hanging near the stove, the fibers holding the heat against your body as you fasten the toggles one by one from bottom to top. The coat feels different than it did when you took it off, softer and more pliable, as if the warmth has loosened the stiffness that the cold worked into the leather. You pull the collar up around your neck and settle the weight of the coat on your shoulders, a familiar weight that you have carried through many winters, and you feel yourself becoming ready for the cold again, your body preparing itself for the shock of the outside air. Your hat is dry and warm when you pull it down over your ears, the felt soft and pliable from its time on the warm stones, and you adjust the ear flaps so they sit flat against your cheeks. Your gloves are dry too, the leather palms warm and supple, and you work your fingers into them slowly, making sure each finger finds its proper place. You stamp your feet gently to settle your boots, which have also been warming by the stove, and you feel the heat that has soaked into the leather soles, a small reserve of warmth that will stay with you for the first part of your walk. You untie the leather thongs that hold the door flap closed and push aside the felt, ducking low through the entrance and stepping out into a world that has been transformed while you were inside. The snow has stopped falling, the last flakes having drifted down while you were sitting by the stove, and the silence that greets you is so complete that for a moment it feels like a presence, a thing with weight and substance. You stand just outside the tent door, letting the door flap fall closed behind you, and you look up at the sky that has changed as much as the ground. The cloud layer has thinned and broken apart in places, not clearing entirely, but pulling back like a grey blanket being slowly folded, and through the gaps a faint diffused light filters down from the hidden moon somewhere high above. The light is pale and silver grey, too weak to cast shadows, but strong enough to make the snow glow with a soft luminescence, as if the ground itself is producing its own light. You can see much farther now than you could earlier in the evening. The world opened up again after being closed in by the falling snow, and the landscape that spreads out before you is all shades of white and pale grey, and the deepest blue-black where the clouds still hang thick. The snow is deep, much deeper than it was when you last walked through it, knee-deep in the places where it has drifted against the low rises and the clumps of sagebrush. You take your first steps away from the tent, and your boots sink into the soft surface, breaking through a thin crust that has formed on top, a crust of ice crystals that makes a faint crunching sound as it gives way, The walking is slower now, each step requiring a small lift of the knee and a careful placement of the foot. But you do not mind the slowness because there is no hurry and because the slow pace matches the quiet of the night. You make your way toward the herd, following the same path you have followed all day, though the path itself is long buried, and you navigate now by the feel of the ground under the snow and by the darker shapes of the horses that you can see ahead. The horses are still there, of course, standing where they have stood since the storm began, and in the faint moonlight they look like part of the landscape itself, like low hills that have risen out of the snow. Their dark coats are dusted with frost, the fine crystals catching the pale light and making each horse appear to have a faint silvery outline, a halo of cold fire that shimmers when they move. You walk toward them very slowly, your boots crunching softly through the snow crust, your breath forming clouds that hang in the still air for a moment before dissipating. The air is colder now than it was during the snowfall, the temperature dropping as the clouds thin out, and you can feel the cold pressing against your cheeks and the tip of your nose with a sharp insistence. But your coat is warm, and your hat is warm, and your gloves are warm, and the walking keeps your blood moving, so the cold is not uncomfortable, only present. A fact of the night like the snow and the silence and the pale light of the hidden moon. As you approach the herd, you see that the horses have not moved from their positions except to shift their weight and to rearrange themselves slightly, some of them having turned to face a different direction now that the wind has dropped. They stand in small clusters, the family bands that you know so well, each group a little island of dark shapes in the sea of white. The foals are still tucked against their mothers, invisible except for the small mounds of snow on their backs and the occasional flick of a small ear. The mares are patient and still, their heads low and their eyes half closed, and the young stallion stands a little apart from his band, his head raised and his ears pricked forward, watching you approach with calm attention. You enter the herd slowly, moving between the dark shapes with the ease of long familiarity, your body finding its way through the gaps and around the flanks and shoulders that you know by sight and by touch. The horses do not startle or move away, they simply accept your presence as part of the natural order of the night, and some of them turn their heads slightly to acknowledge you as you pass. The smell of the herd is strong in the cold air, a warm animal smell of hide and breath and the faint sweetness of the hay they ate earlier, and you breathe it in with a quiet satisfaction, the smell of healthy horses at rest. You walk from one cluster to the next, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who has all the time in the world, and as you pass each horse, you reach out and touch them briefly, a hand on a neck here, a hand on a flank there. The touch is light and gentle, not a pat or a stroke, but simply a contact, a way of saying that you are here and that you see them. The horses are warm under your hand, their thick winter coats rough and shaggy on the surface but dense and soft underneath, and you can feel the deep heat of their bodies radiating through the hair, a heat that has been built from the hay they ate and the slow burning of their internal fires. You murmur the same soft words you have always used with horses, words that are not commands or even names but simply sounds, low and rhythmic and calm. The words do not mean anything in particular. They are not a language that can be written down or translated, but the horses know them, and you know them, and the meaning is in the tone rather than the sound. Your voice is quiet, barely more than a whisper, and it blends with the soft sounds of the herd, the breathing and the shifting and the occasional stamp of a hoof on the packed snow. The snow has stopped falling completely now, and the silence is so deep and so complete that you can hear things you would never hear during the day or during the storm. You stop walking for a moment and stand still, letting the silence settle around you, and you listen. Far off across the open steppe, somewhere beyond the ridge and out on the flat grassland, a fox calls, a high sharp bark that cuts through the cold air and then fades away. You wait, and after a long pause the fox calls again, a single note that hangs in the silence and then is gone, and you wonder what the fox is doing out on the snow-covered steppe in the deep of the night, hunting perhaps or simply calling to another fox somewhere even farther away. The fox falls silent and the night returns to its deep stillness, but now you are aware of the smaller sounds that fill the space around you. You can hear the snow settling, a faint creak and shift as the crystals adjust to the cold and to their own weight. You can hear the breathing of the horses, the slow rise and fall of many lungs working in the cold air, and you can hear the soft grinding sound of one horse chewing on a stem of hay that it has found buried under the snow. You can hear your own heartbeat, a steady thump that you are not usually aware of, but that becomes audible in the great quiet of the night. You continue your slow walk through the herd, moving from the outer edge toward the center where the lead mare stands with her band. She is easy to find, her grey coat pale against the darker shapes of the other horses, and she stands with her usual calm authority, her head raised slightly and her ears turned toward you as you approach. She has been watching you make your rounds, her dark eyes following your slow progress through the herd, and now she waits for you to reach her with the patience of an animal who knows that everything will happen in its proper time. You stop beside her and rest your hand on her shoulder, feeling the familiar contours of her body under the thick winter coat. Her shoulder is solid and warm, the muscle firm under the skin, and you can feel the slow, steady beat of her heart if you press your hand just so. A rhythm that is slower than your own, deep and calm. She turns her head toward you and blows a warm breath against your sleeve, her nostrils fluttering softly, and the breath fogs in the cold air and leaves a small patch of moisture on the wool of your coat. You stand together for a long time, sharing the quiet of the deep winter night, asking nothing of each other, simply present. There is a kind of peace in standing with the lead mare that is different from the peace you find inside the tent. The tent is shelter and warmth and the small domestic comforts of food and drink and rest. But standing with the horses in the snow is something else entirely, a connection to the larger world that goes beyond comfort and into something older and deeper. You have felt this since you were a child, standing beside your first horse in the summer pasture while the sun set over the steppe. And you feel it now just as strongly, the sense that you are part of something that stretches back through time and forward into the future. A long, unbroken line of herders and horses moving together through the seasons. You stand with the lead mare until the cold begins to creep through the warmth of your coat, a slow insinuation that starts at your cheeks and your fingertips and works its way inward. You do not mind the cold. It is simply a signal that it is time to move again, to keep the blood flowing and to check on the rest of the herd. You give the lead mare a final touch on her neck and then you move on, walking slowly toward the next cluster of horses that stands a little farther along the lee of the ridge. This cluster is the young stallion's band, the bay stallion with the 2 yearlings and his 7 mares, and they stand close together in a tight group that radiates warmth into the cold air. The stallion watches you approach with his head raised and his ears pricked forward, not with alarm but with the alert attention that a good stallion always gives to anything approaching his family. You speak a low word to him as you draw near, the same soft greeting you use with all the horses, and he recognizes your voice and your shape and relaxes, his ears swiveling sideways and his head lowering slightly. You do not approach him directly, respecting his role and his space, but you walk around the edge of his band, counting the dark shapes and noting that the yearlings are standing close to each other for warmth, their young bodies pressed together like 2 foals who have not yet learned to be fully independent. You complete your circuit of the stallion's band and then move on, walking slowly through the deep snow to the small band of younger horses who have not yet found their permanent families. These are the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds, horses who are no longer foals but not yet fully established in the herd hierarchy, and they stand a little apart from the main body of the herd, a loose cluster of restless energy even in the deep cold of the night. They are more alert than the older horses, their heads lifting as you approach, their ears swiveling and their tails flicking, and you spend a little extra time with them, walking among them and touching each one, because the young horses need the reassurance of your presence more than the older ones do. You speak to them in the same low voice, the same soft words, and you let them smell your coat and your gloves, let them recognize you by scent, as well as by sight and sound. One of the young geldings, a dart bay with a white star on his forehead, nudges your shoulder gently with his nose, and you reach up to scratch the rough hair behind his ears. He leans into the scratch, his eyes half closing, and you feel the small tension in his neck release as he accepts the comfort of your touch. You stand with the young horses for a while, letting them grow accustomed to the night and the snow and the silence, and then you move on. The old gelding stands alone at the very edge of the herd, as he always does, keeping a small distance between himself and the other horses. He's a horse who was once a riding animal, back when your uncle was young and strong and rode out every day to check on the herds, and now he spends his days in quiet retirement, tolerated by the mares and ignored by the stallions, asking nothing of anyone. His coat is grey with age, almost white in the moonlight, and his back is swayed and his knees are stiff, but his eyes are still clear and his ears still prick forward when you approach. He knows you, this old horse, and he takes a step toward you as you draw near, a small movement that is almost a greeting. You stop beside him and rest your hand on his neck, feeling the old bones under the loose skin, the sharp ridge of his withers, and the hollow places where the muscle has thinned with age. His winter coat is still thick and warm, and he still carries himself with a certain dignity, the memory of the strong young horse he once was. You scratch the rough hair between his ears, and he lowers his head, his eyes half closing, and his breath comes out in a long, slow sigh that fobs in the cold air. You have a special affection for this old horse who has been part of your life for as long as you can remember, and you stand with him for a long time, sharing the quiet of the night and the deep peace of the snow-covered steppe. The moon, still hidden behind the thin layer of cloud, shifts its position, and the light on the snow changes slightly, becoming a little brighter and a little more silver. You can see the landscape more clearly now, the smooth white expanse of the steppe stretching away in all directions, the low ridge rising to the north, the dark shapes of the horses standing patient and still, and far to the south, the faint glow of the stove light leaking through the felt walls of the tent. The world is beautiful in a way that is hard to describe, a beauty that comes from simplicity and stillness and the absence of anything unnecessary, and you feel a quiet gratitude for being here, in this place, at this moment. You finish your walk through the herd and stand at the edge of the gathered horses, looking back at the way you have come. Your tracks through the snow are the only marks on the smooth white surface, a winding line of deep holes that shows where you have walked among the horses. And even now the tracks are beginning to fill in with the fine drift of snow that the light breeze is carrying across the surface. By morning they will be gone, and the snow will be smooth and unbroken again, as if no one had ever walked here at all. You watch the tracks filling in for a moment, the slow erasure of your passage, and then you turn and begin to walk back toward the tent, your body tired in a good way, and your mind calm and still. The walk back feels shorter than the walk out, as it always does, and soon you are standing outside the tent door, knocking the snow from your boots against the flat stone. You loosen the ties and duck inside, and the warmth of the stove welcomes you home, wrapping around your cold cheeks and your cold hands like a living thing. You close the door and tie it shut, and then you stand for a moment in the dim orange light, letting the transition from cold to warm happen slowly, feeling the peace of the night settle into your bones like the snow settles on the steppe, layer upon layer, quiet and deep and lasting. Back inside the tent, you close the door flap and tie the leather thongs securely, then stand for a moment, letting the warmth settle over your cold skin. The stove is still burning well. The dung you added before going out, now reduced to a deep bed of orange coals that radiate a steady, gentle heat. You take off your coat and hat and gloves, hanging them on their pegs, and you sit down on the layered felt carpets near the stove, crossing your legs and resting your hands on your knees. The night outside is deep and still, the snow having stopped entirely, and the only sound is the low murmur of the wind and the soft hiss of the stove. You sit for a while, not doing anything in particular, just breathing and being still, and then your eyes fall on the leather halter that hangs from a peg on the lattice wall near the door. It is an old halter, one you have used for many seasons, and the leather near the buckle has grown thin and cracked, worn by the constant rubbing against the metal and the pull of the lead rope. You have been meaning to repair it for some time, but the days have been full of other tasks and the repair was never urgent. Now, in the quiet of the deep night with the herd resting peacefully outside, you decide that the time has come. You rise and take the halter from its peg, bringing it back to your seat by the stove and laying it across your lap. The leather is dark brown and smooth in the places where it has been handled often, the surface polished by the oil from your hands and the friction of use. Near the buckle, the leather is lighter in color, the dye worn away, and you can see the fine cracks that radiate out from the buckle hole, like tiny rivers on a map. The stitching that holds the buckle in place is still intact, but the threads are frayed, the sinew dried out and brittle from years of exposure to sun and snow and the sweat of horses. You run your thumb over the worn spot, feeling the texture of the damaged leather, and you begin to plan the repair in your mind. You rise again and go to the small wooden chest that sits against the far wall of the tent, the chest your grandfather made long ago from planks of willow wood fitted together without nails. The lid lifts easily on its leather hinges, and inside the chest is a collection of small tools and supplies that you have gathered over the years, each item in its own place, each one with its own purpose. You take out a piece of softened leather, a scrap left over from a larger piece you used last autumn to repair a saddle girth, and you hold it up to the lamplight to examine it. The leather is supple and strong, a medium brown that is slightly lighter than the halter, and it is thick enough to bear the strain of a lead rope without tearing. You set the leather scrap aside and reach into the chest again, this time bringing out a bone awl with a handle wrapped in sinew, a spool of sinew thread that you prepared yourself from the back tendons of a deer, and a wooden needle with an eye just large enough to pass the sinew through. The awl is smooth and pale, the bone having been polished by years of use until it gleams faintly in the dim light, and the point is still sharp and true. The sinew thread is a pale cream color, almost white, and it is strong and slightly sticky to the touch, the natural glue still present in the fibers. You set these tools on the felt carpet beside you, arranging them in a neat row, the awl, the needle, the spool of thread, the scrap of leather. You return to the chest one more time and take out the small oil lamp that you use when you need a working light, a simple clay bowl with a wick made of twisted wool that burns mutton fat. You set the lamp on the flat stone beside the stove and light it with a splinter of wood touched to the stove's coals, and the wick catches immediately, burning with a steady yellow flame that casts a warm circle of light around your workspace. The lamp adds its own small smell to the air of the tent, a faint animal scent of burning fat that mingles with the smell of the dung smoke and the dried herbs. You sit down again and arrange yourself comfortably, crossing your legs and settling the halter across your lap, with the warm section facing upward, positioned in the circle of lamplight where you can see it clearly. You take the awl in your right hand and the halter in your left, and you begin to remove the old stitching that holds the buckle in place, working the point of the awl under each stitch and lifting it gently until the sinew snaps. The old thread breaks easily, having lost its strength over the years, and you work your way around the buckle with patience and care, not wanting to tear the original leather more than necessary. Each stitch comes out with a small popping sound, and you collect the broken pieces of sinew in a small pile on the carpet beside your knee. When all the old stitching is removed, you lift the buckle away from the halter and set it aside, a small piece of iron that is dark with age, but still strong and true. The leather underneath the buckle is creased and compressed, having been held in that shape for so long that it seems to remember the buckle even when the buckle is gone, and you smooth it with your fingers, feeling the dip and the ridge where the metal pressed into the hide. You take the scrap of new leather and lay it over the worn section, marking with your thumbnail where the cuts will need to be made, and then you take your small knife from the chest and trim the scrap to fit. The knife is sharp and the leather cuts cleanly, the blade sliding through the dense fibers with a soft whispering sound. You work slowly, making small, careful cuts and checking the fit against the halter after each one, and gradually the scrap takes on the shape you need, a small patch that will reinforce the worn area and give the buckle a fresh surface to rest against. When the patch is cut to your satisfaction, you place it over the worn section and hold it in place with your thumb, examining the alignment from different angles in the lamplight. The fit is good, the edges lying flat against the original leather, with no gaps or wrinkles. You thread the wooden needle with a length of sinew, pulling it through the eye and then drawing it through your fingers to smooth out the kinks. The sinew is stiff but pliable, and you wet the end with your lips to make it easier to pass through the needle, an old habit that you learned from your mother when she first taught you to sew. You position the halter on your knee and take up the awl, pressing the point through the new leather patch and the original leather beneath it, making the first hole. The awl goes through with a steady pressure, the bone point parting the fibers without tearing them, and you work it back and forth slightly to make the hole smooth and even before withdrawing it. You pass the needle through the hole, pulling the sinew thread after it until a short tail remains on the near side. The sinew slides through the leather with a faint hissing sound, and you pull it snug but not tight, leaving a little give for the leather to settle. You make a second hole with the awl, spacing it carefully from the first, and pass the needle through again, this time from the opposite side, to create a cross stitch that will hold the layers together with even tension. The rhythm of the work settles into you quickly, as it always does. The press of the awl, the pass of the needle, the pull of the thread, the pause to check the tension and the alignment, and then the next hole, the next stitch, the next small advance along the curve of the buckle. You work slowly, by the steady yellow flame, making careful stitches that pull the new leather into place against the old. The sinew thread is strong and slightly rough against your fingers, and you can feel each stitch as it tightens, the layers of leather compressing together and becoming one. The smell of the leather rises around you as you work, a rich animal smell that is different from the smell of the stove or the lamp, a smell that reminds you of horses and saddles and the long rides across the summer steppe. The lamp casts warm shadows on the curved walls of the tent, the flames dancing slightly with the small draughts from the smoke hole, and the shadows move in a slow rhythm that matches the rhythm of your stitching. The sound of your breathing blends with the whisper of the stove and the distant hum of the wind outside, and the tent feels very close and very quiet, a small warm bubble in the middle of the frozen night. You pause in your work for a moment and lift your head, listening to the wind that has picked up again, sending a fine drift of snow against the felt walls with a sound like sand being scattered. The horses are fine, you know, standing out in the renewed breeze, with their backs to the wind and their coats thick with frost, and the thought passes through your mind without disturbing the calm that has settled over you. You return your attention to the halter, taking up the awl and the needle and continuing the slow, steady work of repair. The stitches march in a neat line around the buckle, each one placed beside the one before it, with a consistency that comes from years of practice. You learned to sew leather when you were young, sitting beside your grandmother in the summer camp while the horses grazed on the far hills and the women worked on the endless tasks of mending and making. Your grandmother's hands were gnarled and strong, the fingers bent from a lifetime of work, but her stitches were always even and true, and she taught you to be patient with the leather, to let the awl do the work, to pull the thread with a steady hand, and never to rush. You think of her now as you work, her voice in your memory saying the same words she always said. The leather will wait for you, so you must wait for the leather. You stitch around the full curve of the buckle, then turn and stitch back the other way, creating a double row of sinew that will bear the strain of the lead rope without breaking. The pattern of the stitches is simple and strong, a cross hatch of pale thread against the dark leather, and when you finish the second pass, you tie off the sinew with a small tight knot and trim the end close to the leather with your knife. You run your thumb over the new stitching, feeling the slight roughness of the sinew and the firmness of the patch, and you are satisfied. The repair will hold for many more seasons, and the halter will continue to serve its purpose, carrying the smell of your hands and the warmth of the horses it touches. You set the halter aside on the felt carpet and stretch your fingers, which have grown slightly stiff from the fine work. You flex them slowly, feeling the joints pop and the circulation return, and then you begin to gather your tools together. The awl you wipe clean with a scrap of felt and return to the wooden chest. The needle you tuck into the small leather sheath that protects its point. The spool of sinew you set back in its place beside the other supplies. The knife you close and put away, and the scraps of cut leather and broken sinew you collect and set near the stove to be burned later. You leave the oil lamp burning for now, its yellow flame still steady and bright, because you might need it again before the night is over. You pick up the halter and hold it to the lamplight, turning it over in your hands to examine your work from every angle. The new patch sits flush against the old leather, the stitch is even and tight, and the buckle is now firmly secured, ready for use. The halter looks different now than it did before, a little mended and a little worn, but it is still the same halter you have always used, the same leather that has passed through your hands 1,000 times, and the repair is simply another chapter in its long history, another mark of the passing seasons. You hang it back on its peg near the door, where it will wait for the morning and for the next time you need to lead a horse from the herd. You return to your seat by the stove and pour yourself a bowl of water from the pot, which is still warm though no longer steaming. You drink it slowly, holding the bowl in both hands and letting the warmth settle in your stomach, and you think about the work you have just done. The act of stitching is itself a kind of rest, a quiet focus that allows the mind to settle like the snow settling on the grass outside, and you feel a deep calm that comes from having completed a small task well. The halter is repaired, the herd is resting, the tent is warm, and the night stretches out ahead of you, with nothing demanding your attention, no urgency and no worry, only the slow, steady rhythm of the winter hours. You add a few pieces of dung to the stove, banking the fire for the later part of the night, and you stretch out on the felt carpets, propping your head on a folded blanket and closing your eyes. The wind continues its low song against the tent walls, and the stove ticks and hisses softly, and the warmth wraps around you like a living thing, heavy and comforting. You do not mean to sleep, only to rest for a moment before the next check on the herd, and your mind drifts into that space between waking and sleeping where thoughts become loose and easy, floating through your awareness like the snowflakes that are beginning to fall again outside. The halter hangs on its peg, the horses stand patient in the snow, the stove burns steady and warm, and the long night continues in its slow and peaceful way. The stove has burned low while you sat working on the halter, the bed of coals settled into a deep orange glow that gives off less light but still radiates a steady warmth into the tent. You rise from the felt carpets, your body moving with the slight stiffness that comes from sitting still in one position for a long time, and you walk to the pile of dried dung beside the stove. You select 3 pieces, choosing ones that are whole and dry and roughly the same size, and you open the stove door and place them carefully on the coals, one beside the other with a small gap between each for the air to move through. The coals are still hot enough that the fresh dung catches almost immediately, thin wisps of smoke curling up from the surface before the first small flames appear and begin to lick around the edges. You close the stove door and stand for a moment, feeling the warmth begin to build again as the fire takes hold of the new fuel, and then you walk to the tent door and loosen the leather thongs. The door flap falls open and you duck through the low entrance, stepping out into the deepest part of the night. The hours before dawn, when the cold is at its strongest and the world seems to hold its breath. The snow has resumed falling, not the steady, persistent fall of earlier, but a lighter drifting of small, dry flakes that blow sideways on a breeze that has sprung up while you were inside, stinging your cheeks lightly as you turn your face toward the herd. The darkness is nearly complete, the moon now hidden behind a thicker layer of cloud that has moved in from the north, and you cannot see the horses from the tent door. You know where they are, though, and you begin to walk in that direction, your boots sinking into the fresh snow that has fallen on top of the old snow, making a soft crunching sound with each step. The cold presses against your face and your hands, finding the small gaps at your cuffs and collar, but your coat is warm and your hat is warm, and the walking keeps your blood moving through your body in its steady circles. As you draw closer to the place where the herd was standing, you realize that they have moved. The dark shapes are not where you left them, not in the same positions along the lee of the ridge, and for a moment you pause and look around, scanning the dim whiteness for any sign of them. Then you see the tracks, deep holes in the fresh snow that lead away from the old position and curve around the base of the ridge toward the south, and you follow them with your eyes until you find the herd again, a cluster of darker shapes against the pale snow, standing in a new sheltered spot a few dozen paces from where they were before. You follow their tracks, stepping into the deep holes that their hooves have made, the snow compressed and packed down by the weight of many horses moving slowly through the night. The tracks are easy to follow, a wide path of churned snow that winds around the curve of the ridge and ends at the new position the herd has chosen, a hollow where the ridge bends slightly and creates a deeper shelter from the shifting wind. The horses have found this place on their own, following the old wisdom that tells them where to stand when the wind changes, and you feel a quiet satisfaction at their good sense. You walk among them slowly, your eyes adjusting to the deeper darkness here in the lee of the ridge, and you begin to count heads, touching each horse as you pass. The lead mare is at the center as always, her grey coat pale even in the dimness, and she turns her head to blow a warm breath in your direction as you approach. The young stallion and his band are here, the yearlings standing close together for warmth, their young bodies pressed side to side. The small band of younger horses is here, a little restless still, their heads lifting as you pass. The old gelding is here, standing at the edge as always, his old bones finding a spot where the snow is thinner and the footing is easier. All of them are accounted for, all of them standing with their backs to the wind, their coats thick with frost and their breath puffing white in the cold air. You stop beside the lead mare and stand with her for a while, listening to the sound of the herd at rest. The breathing of so many large animals blends together into a deep, slow rhythm, an inhale and exhale that seems to match the pulse of the night itself, and you can hear the small sounds that accompany it, the shift of a hoof on the packed snow, the rustle of a coat being shaken briefly before the horse settles again, the low rumbling sound of a mare communicating something private to her foal. The snow falls around you in its small dry flakes, and the wind hums its low steady note against the ridge, and the cold wraps around you like another layer of clothing, familiar and almost comfortable. You lose track of time standing among the horses, the way you often do during these deep night checks. There is something about the hours before dawn that makes time feel different, stretched out and slowed down, each moment exactly like the one before it and the one after it, and you sink into that rhythm without resistance. You are not sleeping and not fully waking either, but somewhere in between, a state of quiet awareness that is enough to notice if something were wrong, but calm enough to let the minutes pass without counting them. You have stood like this many times before, in many winter nights, and the feeling is as familiar as the feeling of your own heartbeat. The herd accepts your presence without any sign of disturbance, the horses continuing their slow breathing and their small shifts of weight, their ears flicking occasionally in your direction and then relaxing again. You are part of their world just as they are part of yours, and the trust between you is so old and so deep that it requires no demonstration and no proof. It is simply there, built up over years of quiet presence and steady care, and you feel it now as a kind of warmth that has nothing to do with the temperature of the air. After a time that you cannot measure, you begin to walk again, moving slowly through the herd and checking each horse with a brief touch and a quiet word. You run your hand over the back of a mare, feeling the thick layer of snow that has accumulated on her coat, and under the snow the deep warmth of her body, the heat that the hay and the summer grass have become inside her. You check the foals, each one still pressed against its mother, their small bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep, their ears twitching occasionally at some dream of running through green grass. You check the yearlings, the young stallion, the restless young horses who are gradually learning the patience of their elders, and you check the old gelding last, spending an extra moment with him because he is old and because the old ones deserve an extra moment. When you have finished your circuit, you stand at the edge of the herd and look out across the snow-covered steppe. The darkness is so complete that you cannot see the horizon, cannot tell where the land ends and the sky begins, and the falling snow adds to the sense of boundlessness, the flakes appearing out of the blackness and disappearing into the whiteness below. You feel the vastness of the steppe around you, the miles of open grassland that stretch away in every direction, and you feel your own smallness in the middle of it, a smallness that is not frightening, but somehow comforting, the same comfort a foal might feel pressed against his mother in the dark. The night feels endless and yet perfectly measured, each moment exactly like the one before, the cold wrapping around you like another layer of clothing, the snow falling in its slow, persistent way, the horses standing patient and still. You think about the generations of herders who have stood in this same spot or in spots very like it, watching over their herds through the long winter nights, feeling the same cold and the same peace and the same deep connection to the animals in their care. Your grandfather stood here, and his grandfather before him, and the line stretches back into a past so distant that no one remembers its beginning, a long unbroken chain of herders and horses and winter storms. The wind shifts slightly, turning a little more to the east, and the snow begins to fall at a different angle, the flakes now brushing against your right cheek instead of your left. You feel the change and note it, adding it to the long tally of small observations that make up your awareness of the night, and you turn your collar up a little higher to block the new angle of the cold. The horses have already adjusted, you notice. Their bodies shifted slightly to keep their backs to the wind, the small movements made without any sign of discomfort or urgency. You remain with the herd for a while longer, walking slowly back through them one more time before you return to the tent. The snow continues to fall, the flakes now a little larger and a little wetter, the kind of snow that means the temperature is rising slightly as the dawn approaches. You can feel the change in the air, a subtle softening of the bitter cold, a slight loosening of the tight grip that the deep night has held on the land. The dawn is still some hours away, but the first small signs of its approach are beginning to show themselves, and you register them with the part of your mind that always watches the weather and the sky. You turn and begin to walk back toward the tent, your boots following the same tracks you made coming out, the deep holes now beginning to fill with the new snow. The tent is a darker shape against the dark ridge, and you can see the faint orange glow of the stove light through the felt walls, a small beacon that has guided you home many times before. You walk toward it slowly, your body tired in a good way, your mind calm and still, and you feel the night settle around you like a companion, quiet and patient, and full of the long peace of winter. A gradual lightening in the east, more a softening of the darkness than a true dawn, tells you that morning is coming. There is no sunrise to see, no band of color along the horizon, only a slow transition from the deep black of night to a paler shade of gray that creeps across the sky like water seeping into cloth. You notice it first as a change in the quality of the darkness outside the tent, a subtle thinning that makes the smoke hole above the stove appear as a circle of lighter gray rather than a circle of black. The snow is still falling, but gently now, a few last flakes drifting down from the thick grey clouds that remain overhead, their underside smooth and unbroken, promising more snow later in the day, perhaps or perhaps not, the weather keeping its own counsel as it always does. You have been dozing on and off through the last hours of the night, not sleeping deeply, but resting in that space between waking and sleep where the mind drifts and the body stays still. And now you sit up on the felt carpets and push back the blanket you pulled over yourself sometime in the deep hours. The stove has burned down again. The coals a dim orange glow visible through the small door, and the air inside the tent is cooler than it was, cool enough that you can see your breath as a faint mist when you exhale. You rise and walk to the stove, your body moving with the slight slowness that comes from a night of broken rest, and you open a small door and look inside at the bed of ash and embers that still holds enough heat to catch fresh fuel. You add several pieces of dried dung, more than you added during the night, enough to build the fire up hot and strong, and you leave the stove door open just a crack so the air can flow in and feed the flames. The fire catches quickly, the new dung sending up thin wisps of sweet smoke before the flames appear, and you watch the orange glow brighten and spread, the tiny sparks floating upward through the chimney pipe to join the grey sky outside. The stove begins to tick as it heats, the familiar sharp little sounds that mean the iron is expanding, and the warmth starts to build again, spreading outward from the stove and filling the tent. You take the water pot from its place on the stove and carry it to the door, pushing aside the felt flap and scooping it full of clean snow from the drift that has piled up against the tent wall overnight. The snow is light and dry, and it hisses as you pack it into the pot, the cold crystals sticking to your glove. You carry the pot back to the stove and set it on the hot surface, and the snow begins to melt almost immediately, collapsing into itself with a soft sighing sound, the crystals turning to water that pools at the bottom of the pot while the snow above slowly sinks down to take its place. You add more snow as the level drops, packing it in until the pot is nearly full of cold meltwater, and then you close the stove door and let the fire do its work. While the water heats, you take a moment to straighten the tent, shaking out the blanket you slept under and folding it neatly, placing it back in its spot in the corner. You pick up the few scraps of leather and broken sinew from your halter repair and toss them into the stove, where they curl and blacken and disappear. You sweep the felt carpets with your hand, brushing away the crumbs and the bits of chaff that have accumulated over the night, and you arrange the cushions and the sitting mats so that the tent feels ordered and calm, ready for the day ahead. These small tasks are part of the morning rhythm, the resetting of the small world inside the tent, and you do them without thinking, your hands moving through the familiar motions while your mind rests in the quiet space of early morning. The water in the pot begins to bubble, a soft rolling boil that sends steam rising toward the smoke hole, and you add a generous pinch of salt from the small leather pouch in the wooden chest, watching the white crystals dissolve into the water and disappear. Salted tea is a morning ritual, something warm and savory to wake the body and prepare it for the cold work ahead. And you make it the same way your mother made it and her mother before her. A simple combination of hot water, salt, and the small piece of dried tea brick that you shave with your knife and crumble into the pot. The tea brick is dark and hard, pressed from leaves that were traded from far away, carried across the steppe in caravans that you have heard stories about but never seen, and its flavor is earthy and slightly bitter, a taste that you have known since childhood. You let the tea steep for a while, the water darkening to a deep brown, and then you pour it into your clay bowl and carry it to the door. You loosen the ties and push aside the felt flap, and you sit just inside the entrance with the bowl held in both hands, looking out at the world that the storm has left behind. The snow has nearly stopped, only a few last flakes drifting down from the grey sky, and the landscape that spreads out before you is so completely transformed that it seems like a different place than the one you walked through yesterday afternoon. Every familiar feature has been softened and rounded and covered over, the brown grass buried deep, the low sagebrush reduced to small mounds of white, the scattered rocks vanished entirely beneath the smooth blanket of snow. The horses are beginning to move now, the first stirrings of the new day spreading through the herd as the light grows stronger. They are still standing in the sheltered spot they found during the night, but their heads are lifting and their ears are pricking forward, and some of them are starting to paw at the snow with their front hooves, scraping away the white layer to reach the buried grass beneath. The pawing is slow and methodical, each horse working at its own small patch, the snow flying up in small sprays and then settling back. You watch a bay mare uncover a patch of winter-killed grass, the stems pale and dry but still containing some nourishment, and she lowers her head to graze with the same slow patience that she showed during the storm, taking her time, wasting nothing. The foals are waking too, shaking off the snow that has accumulated on their backs during the night and stretching their small legs with the exaggerated movements of young animals greeting a new day. You watch one little colt take a few unsteady steps away from his mother, his legs still stiff from the long night of standing still, and then he turns and presses himself back against her flank, seeking the warmth and the comfort of her presence. His mother turns her head and nuzzles him briefly, a small gesture of reassurance, and then returns to her grazing. The scene is so calm and so ordinary that it fills you with a quiet contentment, the knowledge that the storm has passed and the herd is well and the long night is over. You finish your tea, the last sip now only lukewarm, and you set the bowl aside on the carpet. You rise and put on your coat and hat and gloves, the same familiar routine, and you step out of the tent and into the cold morning air. The cold is still sharp, the temperature not yet risen much from the deep hours of the night, but there is a different quality to it now, a hint of the slow warming that will come as the day progresses, a subtle softening at the edges. Your breath still fogs in the air, but the clouds seem thinner now, less dense, and they dissipate more quickly in the light breeze that has replaced the strong wind of the night. You walk toward the herd through the deep snow, your boots sinking past your ankles with each step, and the horses see you coming, and some of them lift their heads in acknowledgement before returning to their grazing. The snow is not as deep here in the sheltered hollow where the herd spent the night, the ridge having blocked the full force of the drifting, and the horses have already trampled down a wide area around themselves, packing the snow into a firm platform that makes walking easier once you reach it. You climb up onto the packed snow and walk among them, your boots leaving only shallow prints on the compressed surface. The daily tasks that follow every storm are waiting for you, a list of small jobs that you have done many times before and will do many times again. The first task is to check the condition of the herd more thoroughly than you could during the night, looking at each horse in the growing light for any sign of injury or illness. You walk from one to the next, running your hands over their bodies, feeling for any unusual heat or swelling, checking their eyes and their noses and their ears. The horses tolerate your examination with the same patience they've shown all night, standing still while you lift their feet to check for ice packed in their hooves, and while you feel along their legs for any sign of strain. You find no injuries, no signs of sickness, no ice packed so tightly that it needs to be pried loose. The herders come through the storm in good condition, their thick coats and their deep warmth and their ancient knowledge of how to endure having served them well. You feel a quiet satisfaction of this, not pride, because you know that the horses did most of the work themselves, but a sense of rightness, a confirmation that the partnership between herder and herd is functioning as it should. The next task takes you to the felt covers that protect the hay store and the water trough and the other supplies around the camp. The covers are heavy with snow, the white layer several fingers deep on top of the felt, and you go from one to the next, shaking the snow off with careful movements, lifting the edges of the felt and letting the snow slide off to the ground. The felt underneath is dry and intact, the snow having formed a protective layer rather than soaking through, and you check the weights that hold the covers down, the stones and bones that you placed in the autumn, finding them all still in position. The water trough is a shallow hollow carved into a fallen log, lined with clay and covered with felt to keep the water from freezing solid too quickly, and when you lift the felt cover, you find that the surface of the water is skimmed with a layer of ice as thick as your finger. You break the ice with a stone, striking it in the center and working outward until the surface is clear, and you lift the broken pieces out and toss them aside onto the snow. The water underneath is cold and dark, and you know the horses will come to drink as the day warms, their bodies needing the moisture after the long, dry night. You spread more hay for the herd, carrying armloads from the stack to a new spot on the sheltered side of the ridge where the snow's thinner and the horses can graze in comfort. The hay is still fragrant and golden, the summer preserved in its dried stems, and the horses move toward it as you spread it out in a long line on the snow. They eat with the same slow pleasure they showed yesterday, their breath puffing white, their teeth making the soft grinding sound that is one of the most peaceful sounds you know. You stand nearby and watch them, your hands tucked into your sleeves, and you feel the morning settle around you, calm and quiet and full of the simple rhythms of winter. The young foals need extra attention after a storm, their small bodies more vulnerable to the cold than those of the adult horses, and you spend some time checking each one carefully. You feel their ears and their muzzles for the coldness that might indicate they are not staying warm enough, and you watch them move to make sure they are not stiff or limping. The foals accept your handling with the trust that comes from having known you since the day they were born, and one little filly nudges at your coat with her nose, looking for a treat or a scratch. You rub the rough hair between her ears and she leans into your hand, her eyes half closing with pleasure. The morning passes in this slow and steady way, each task flowing into the next without hurry or pause. You shake the snow from the tent ropes and tighten one that has loosened slightly during the night, the leather thong cold and stiff in your hands. You check the smoke hole cap and adjust the flat stone that weights it down, making sure it will hold against any wind that rises later in the day. You bring more dung inside the tent and stack it neatly beside the stove, enough to last through the day and into the coming night. You melt more snow for water and fill the leather bags that hang from the tent poles, the cold liquid sloshing gently as you work. By the time the morning is half spent, the clouds have begun to thin a little more, the grey lightening to a pale silver that makes the snow gleam with a soft brightness. The horses have finished the hay and are spread out across the sheltered hollow, pawing through the snow for the buried grass and finding enough to keep them content. The foals have nursed and are now playing a little, running in small circles in the deep snow, their legs lifting high with each step, their small tails flagged over their backs. Their mothers watch them with calm eyes, and the young stallion circles his band with his head raised and his ears pricked, keeping a gentle watch over his family. You return to the tent and sit down on the felt carpets, your body tired in a good way, the satisfying tiredness that comes from honest work done well. You pour yourself another bowl of salted tea, still warm from the pot on the stove, and you drink it slowly, savoring the heat and the salt and the earthy bitterness of the tea. The tent is warm and quiet, the stove ticking softly, the walls breathing gently with the light breeze outside, and you feel the peace of the morning settle into you like a stone settling into the bottom of a still pool. The storm has passed without harm, leaving only a deep blanket of quiet over the land, and the work of the day is nearly done. You will go out again later to check on the herd, to spread more hay in the afternoon, to break the ice from the water trough when it forms again, to do all the small tasks that make up the life of a herder in winter. But for now you sit in the warmth of the tent and listen to the soft sounds of the morning, the distant call of a bird that has ventured out into the cold, the rustle of the horses grazing in the snow, the whisper of the stove, and the creak of the tent poles. The world is white and silent, and you are simply a herder on the winter steppe, doing what herders have done for uncounted seasons, while the snow settles into the long cold sleep of the earth, waiting for the spring that will come eventually, as it always does, as it always has, as it always will.